I'm back with Richard Gage. He's an architect. He's also the founder of Architects and Engineers for a 911Truth. You don't believe that this was possibly, these towers, the Twin Towers were brought down by these planes. Molten metal, you say, was present. Tell me about these cutter charges. Explain this.
Well, it turns out that all of the dust which blanketed lower Manhattan to 4 inches thick contains within it these iron-rich microspheres, billions of them, estimated to be in weight about 10 tons. And these are smaller than a human hair, most of them. Dr. Jones found them only 8-9 months ago. And they also have the chemical evidence of thermate. Well, how did they get formed? Well, if there were thousands of these cutter charges placed throughout the beams and columns in the building...
You're saying thousands of charges, thousands of little explosives?
Well, one would have to, in order to bring a building down by controlled demolition the size of the World Trade Center, for instance, it would take thousands.
So, okay, let's just assume, let's go with the theory for a second. Thousands of cutter charges placed in this, this huge tower, probably, let's say, a team of 30 people planting these, taking maybe a month to work up into the girders to plant them. Is that what you're saying? Is something maybe like that happened?
That's a reasonable conclusion, yeah.
And no one of these 30 people possibly that planted these charges, maybe more, 100 people to plant thousands of charges, have ever come forward and says, yeah, it was me, I planted the charges, I'm so sorry.
Well, guess what? You're a detective, you walk into a house, there's a dead body on the ground, 3 shell casings. Do you need to know who did it, how they did it, and have anybody talk before you're going to start with a fully resourced forensic investigation with subpoena power under oath? No, you're going to put everything you got on that case because you have evidence of a crime. This chemical evidence is evidence of a crime. These iron microspheres could only have been produced by molten iron under extreme pressure, forming themselves into a...
So this molten iron can't come from melted steel. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's iron. No, it doesn't have chromium in it. Molten iron is the byproduct of thermite.
You didn't do well in chemistry, apparently. I don't know all the tables of the elements well. But anyways, you're the architect, and so you're saying that obviously something else brought these towers down. That's what you're assuming, or at least what you're led to believe.
Oh, clearly, and not only the.
But 3,000 people died for what? What's the theory that you think? I mean, you probably don't want to comment on this, but. Do you think, okay, the U.S. government was behind this to generate a war, to get people mad about terrorism? What do you think?
I'll comment on that, but I want to point out some really critical evidence that we haven't talked about yet. There's not only these iron-rich microspheres that are the product of an aluminothermic reaction, thermite, we also have unexploded chips of thermite. These are red chips up to a 1/16 of an inch long. These are composed of nano-sized particles, extremely small. This stuff is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. We're talking about a very, very high-tech product that only in the last couple of years, Lawrence Livermore Lab and Los Alamos Lab have come out with papers on.
And you're saying only the U.S. government would have access, the U.S. military would have access to this stuff?
Well, let's say it this way. Al-Qaeda didn't have access to it. That's an unreasonable assumption. It's also unreasonable to suggest that Al-Qaeda had access to these buildings to plant these charges. These 3 buildings had to be among the most secure outside the Pentagon. Look at Building 7, for instance, the one which drops exactly in the manner of a controlled demolition at virtually free-fall speed. To achieve that, you have to remove 40,000 tons of structural steel, starting with the core columns all within 1/10 of a second of each other, and then the 57 perimeter columns within 1/10 of a second of each other, and then repeat that every floor, synchronistically timed. So Al-Qaeda didn't have access to that building because it's operated by the CIA, IRS, Department of Defense, and several large financial institutions.
What about the Pentagon? What about that one? The plane goes into there. That's all part. Is that what was the design of that? How come they wouldn't blow up the whole Pentagon?
Well, I haven't studied the Pentagon.
Okay, so you're just talking about these twin towers, these 3 towers.
Well, let's look at the twin towers now, because what we're told is that there's structural weakening due to the airplanes. And by the way, these fires only lasted 56 minutes and 102 minutes. And fires have never brought buildings down that have lasted 18 hours, 24 hours over multiple floors, much hotter fires. So we're told that this 15-story section, for instance, above the jet plane impact, drove the rest of the building down at virtually free fall speed. Let's think about this for a minute.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're told. And so let's take a 15-story building and hold it up over a 95-story building, right? Because we have 110 floors total. And we're going to hold it up with a crane.
Yeah.
And next to it, we're going to take a 15-story building, hold it up over nothing at all.
Right.
And we're going to pull with a crane, and we're going to pull the levers on these cranes. What happens? Which one's going to hit the ground first? The one without any resistance under it, or the one that has to crush 80,000 tons of structural steel? On 9/11, the physics was changed. We're told that they both hit the ground at the same time. That's where our USA tax dollars are going to. $20 million, 3 years of study in this NIST, which, by the way, this NIST report stops at the moment of initiation of collapse. It did not examine the behavior of the building after, they say, collapse initiation began.
So, I mean, you're saying you're giving the scientific data, you got all this forensic evidence. When you present this stuff to people, to the 9/11 Commission, do they just go, I don't want to hear it, talk to the hand, I don't want to, like, what do they say when you talk about this stuff?
Yeah, there is a deafening silence from officials in this government on this subject, and that's why it is a national grassroots movement growing by millions every year. We've only talked about that much of the scientific data.
You got more cards,
so
clearly, yeah.
So, but the people who become aware of this, virtually every architect and engineer that we talk to and show the presentation to in Vancouver and Victoria this weekend, you'll see that 99% of them will agree with us and will disagree with the official story that fires were responsible for these collapses. That's how convincing the evidence is. We don't have to do a hard convincing job here. But people talk to each other.
Okay, we're going to keep going. We have one more segment, and I got some big questions about conspiracy behind this. Is this just a conspiracy, or is there some truth behind what Mr. Gage is saying right after the break?